He saw it all. His face rested on the padding inside of the mask, and he felt it imbuing him with information. He only had to be still and listen and let it flow in. Turn away from the outside world and see within, and he could see images and information before his mind's eye. The mask showed him everything. The tall people are sort of like bipedal mountain goats beneath their clothes and the wrappings and stuff. The tall lady, for instance, had long muscular legs with strangely adapted feet, which is a mixture of sort of a hoof and a paw. It's this odd mountain goatish sort of thing that is built for gripping the sides of cliffs, because where they come from, it's a cold planet, which is known for its fantastic mountain ranges and cliffs and gorges and gullies and canyons and all kinds of treacherous, tortured terrain. And so they're used to trekking these nearly vertical slopes and cliffs, and are not used to the relatively flat landscapes of Earth, because most of their planet is just so twisted up and turned from terrain activity, and so they're used to being able to climb up cliffs with their long legs and just being able to scamper their way up. And that's where they come from, and they built a civilization there. But then the Toyoshari came, and the Toyoshari, it's aliens meeting aliens, the tall people meeting aliens. They came. What are they? They are many species. Max Weber is able to make out this strange seven-fingered creatures, and bipedal and humanoid, but with star-shaped faces. Then they seem to lead this group of alien species called the Toyoshari, and they come and they impose themselves on the tall people, and there's violent strife, and there's periods of tense peace, and the star faces are oppressive, and they use the tall people as work animals because they have such powerful legs, or sometimes to work the engines of their ships. Oh, the ships. That's why the star faces are so powerful. The tall people didn't have space travel before. The star faces can rule so many races and can pull such weight among their equals in the ranks of the Toyoshari, the ranks of the Alien Alliance, because they have monopolized the means for producing space highways, interplanetary highways. The Toyoshari have engines which can propel ships faster than light, and using the black ants, those black points, the little black things that he saw through the fisheye lens that were covering the Earth, those are used as fuel for the reaction to go faster than light, but they don't cover the planets over there. They're rather more rare. They're found in specific pockets within the planet's mantle, and are created by odd quantum effects. Those black dots simply represent the increased concentration of the quantum particles. Particles are put through a special reaction that is able to propel their ships. The problem is it's very dangerous, because the radiation that's created by this reaction can turn your skin bright red as a sort of mutation burn, and it's extremely painful, and then it can further mutate the body's genetic processes and cause you to begin reverting into a more corrupt juvenile stage of development. And the brain, as a result of this, will develop severe complexes to deal with it, and the subject will become psychotic or even animalistic, all within 24 to 48 hours. If you run too hot, the radiation will get too strong, but if you run lower, radiation isn't a problem. But there's a certain kind of resistance that comes from space-time when you try to get over the speed limit with this odd reaction. And so the Toyoshari can create superhighways, or they plow paths of lowered resistance through space-time, which allows ships to travel at lower speeds without problem, but still conquer the immense distances of space, because they can go at a lower speed but be propelled by lowered resistance itself. Kind of like if you have a bubble in a bottle of liquid soap, and if you turn the soap bottle over, you'll see the bubbles will travel along a path, and if you turn it back, it'll travel along that same path, and if you do it, it'll kind of carve in an invisible path of least resistance by which it can more easily travel, and that's how their superhighways work. And so they're the ones who control the means of producing these superhighways, so they're the ones who control the speed and regulate the space travel between planets, and the resources that move between them, and the military troops that move between them. And the tall people despised this, and they sought a way to overcome them, and it came when they found a planet, Earth, just at the edges of their range of vision, on the rims of the Toyoshari's rule. A planet with life, yet a planet filled to the brim with radiating black spots, those quantum particles everywhere on the planet. They've never seen such levels or such concentrations of the particle. The planet is practically swimming in an atmosphere of black ant soup. So many ants could not resist generating the reaction on occasion and cause radiation and cause that to hit the life, because there's life there, and as they can tell, it's intelligent life. It's life like them, that is immune to the effects of the radiation, that has evolved with a genome immune to its effects. How that's possible, they don't know, but perhaps. They waste no time. They send a caravan of ships to the Earth, but there are no highways there. They have to keep it a secret from the Toyoshari, so they must run as low speed as possible. They use special shields to protect themselves from the engines, so they can run as high as they can, praying that that will be enough, but it's not. Several of the ships' shielding fails, and as they're running towards the Earth, they enter fits of psychosis and run their engines even hotter and end up crashing into the Earth months before the tall people could catch up. By then it was too late. They'd turned red, they'd mutated, they'd become juvenile, shorter, stockier, and they'd torn the planet apart. In their lack of caution, they brought diseases from their ships. They didn't take any time, of course, to try to sanitize themselves like the tall people did, and brought all kinds of diseases that killed off a large portion of the human population in the end. And only a few spare adult humans are left, and those are extremely valuable. Mostly there's children who were able to avoid the fights and a lot of the diseases, leaving themselves wandering orphans that the tall people found. And what did the tall people want? They didn't come for more fuel. They came for humans. They wanted the intelligent life that grew up in these circumstances. They came for their immunity. Not for themselves, it was too late for them, but for the tall people's children. Oppressed by a growing galactic empire run by superhighways, they wanted to upheave the system by empowering and intermingling with the only known species who could run as hot as they wanted in space and not care even a bit for the radiation, having developed and evolved for millions of years, living with the exposure of millions of spontaneous quantum reactions a day from these black particles that they had no idea even existed. No need to be afraid, no need of a superhighway, no need for the Toyoshari, able to jump between planets from whatever angle they wanted 100,000 times faster than any Starface ships. Without anyone to negotiate with, the tall people decided to take things completely into their own hands. They took the orphans, they gave them masks, they had them view the Enkai, they made a transfer through these means of their story to the children. They made transfer of information of their race, so that they could mingle their own species' collective archetypes of thought with those of the human children, and thus help transition these children to be able to live with and be comfortable with the tall people, so they could create a generation, raise a great race, could mingle with their own, and could conquer the galaxy. The end of humanity, the end of the tall people, the birth of... He threw the mask off. Toby was standing at the top of the crater with the red wagon next to him, carrying a huge needle syringe gun, and he sees him throw off the mask, and it just sort of clatters over to the side, and so Toby sort of slides down the crater with the syringe gun and starts approaching Max, and Max immediately tries to get up and falls down because his leg, it feels extremely painful, and he also realizes he's feeling rather woozy and lightheaded because of loss of blood, and so he tries to scamper away as Toby, without his eyes, somehow knows where he is and is walking towards him with this thing, and Toby says, "Hey, this will sting, but it'll heal your leg. I already injected you before you'd woke up before. This is the second dosage. It'll help your bones produce more vessels to make up for the lost blood and also help patch up everything." Max, he just keeps scampering away and suddenly says, "Stay back. Get away from me. I know what the tall people want. I know what they did. They did brainwash you. They made you wear those masks. They've been just brainwashed me too. I can't remember how things work. I can only remember alienish things. The houses. I can't remember how my house works. I can't remember what you go in, and he thinks about his house, and he thinks to himself that he doesn't ever want to go in there. It would be like going into some kind of a tree full of weirdly shaped hallways that he doesn't understand why they work that way. Everything has changed. His way of comprehending material has changed. Everything is alien. He's trying to remember things that he used to do, but they all seem so strange and faint all of a sudden. And he's looking around and looking for mountains. He feels like there ought to be mountains, that there ought to be more mountains, but there are no mountains, and that makes him uncomfortable, and he doesn't understand why. And he thinks, my parents. What about my parents? Who are my parents? It makes me want to forget I'm human. You've been brainwashed, he says. You've been brainwashed. You don't think you're human anymore. You're not human anymore. They brainwashed you so that they can make you some kind of a breeder. What happened to your eyes, huh? Why do you have to look at me like that? You can't even look at me. How do you see you? What did they do that to you? And Toby says, no. I can hear you. I volunteered to have them removed. I discovered it would allow me to interface better with some of their technology. Mother disapproved, but I persuaded her to let me do it. Max says, what? Hold still. Gah! He shoves the needle straight into his knee and starts pumping it through, and it stings like crazy, and then he draws it back out, and he's just sort of clutching his knee and rocking back and forth a bit, but then it begins to feel a little bit better, and he feels a little bit more invigorated, as though he's had some adrenaline. And Toby says, yes, I understand that we will be mixing the races. I know how the birds and the bees work and all that stuff, but I don't have to worry about that right now because I'm still 12 and a half. This is the future. There's nothing here for you. There's nothing for you to look back on. And Max says, what does that have to do with it? The tall people took this all away from you in the first place. He says, no, the Reds did. I know they're the same as the tall people, but they're not. They're just crazy. And besides, that's just life. Life is about death and having kids and getting married and getting your life plans screwed up. That's all a part of life. Getting over it and getting along is also a part of life. That is life. I don't know what to say to you. I was hoping maybe you'd just have some questions and stuff, but you're freaking out a lot. I guess I should have expected that. And Max is just sort of sitting in the crater, and he's thinking to himself, he's not really paying attention to Toby, he's thinking to himself, my sister, I need to get my sister. She's up there, and she's in the same position as Toby. I need to get her out of there. I need to get her away from these people. I need to do something about this. That's all he's thinking. And then he asks, did they get up to the tower? Do you know where my sister is? Did they get up to the tower? And Toby says, yeah, they left me behind to help you. We knew that you were likely to survive. You're an adult human, so you can run those walkers on a higher capacity than the Reds ever could without damaging yourself. So you had an advantage. So they left me behind hoping that you'd still be okay and I could help you back up to the towers. And Max says, but the towers, they're smoking now. So what's going on? What's going on up there? Well, Toby says, the engine shields on the north tower failed, and a number of tall people were mutated. A number of my kind were mutated. They've started attacking the towers, and Max says, well, is my sister still up there on the tower? And Toby says, well, yes, I haven't seen any pods leave it, so everybody must still be up there and it hasn't left. But I had to stay down here with you. And Max says, okay, well, and he kind of tries to stand up on his leg and it doesn't hurt as much. Then we've got to get up there and get her back, and anyone who wants to tag along can tag along. Can you lead me to a pod and help me get up to the tower? Toby says, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's what we should do. Max says, fine, then I'll go do it myself. And tries to walk up the crater and ends up kind of falling down again in a heap because it's exhausting. And then he feels Toby walk past him, and Toby gives him a hand and kind of tries to help him up out of the crater and says, all right, yes, I believe I can help you. You need to understand that there is no way you will be able to navigate the towers unless you wear the mask constantly and allow for the intermingling of the archetypes. Because if you don't, the way that the architecture is laid out inside of the towers will just be beyond you. You won't be able to make heads or tails of it. The very logic will be beyond you. Our architecture has achieved things that you might find distressing unless you wear the mask. Max says, well, I'll consider it. And Toby says, I certainly hope you do, and he hands over his own mask, which he picked up from where Max had thrown it down. Max takes it and holds it, and Toby leads him over towards the woods, and before they head over there, Max searches some of the red bodies and picks up a few of their weapons that he's able to strap around him. And the guns are interesting. They've got brassy look to them, but very kind of tarnished brass, as though they were like a musical instrument, but not really. They're not as extravagant as that, but they've got kind of the look of a brassy musical instrument. Straps a long looking kind of shotgun onto his back, and then what looks like a very large sort of pistol onto his side belt. And then Toby leads him into the trees, leads him up to a pod that is landed in between some of the trees, and it apparently cut a swath through the canopy of the trees. It's this circular ball, and that's all it seems to be, and it has markings on it and odd indentations. And Toby approaches it and places his hand on it, and then he runs his hand across the pod, and very kind of organically but also mechanically, almost like clockwork, parts of it shift and move, and it sort of opens up along the seam that he passes his hand along, and it sort of opens itself up. Toby steps inside, and Max follows him, and the moment that he steps inside, he realizes that something is totally off here, because when he steps inside, he's expecting it to be a spherical interior that is the same size as what would be indicated by the outside, but in fact when he steps in, it's a square inside of this circle. It's rather larger than what would be indicated by the outside of the pod. Toby says, maybe you'll understand a little bit as to why you should put on the mask, because this is just the beginning. Max says, well, yes, I'll consider that. Toby seals up the entrance to it, and then Toby reaches into his pocket and pulls out this small black case that he then opens up, and inside are these two obsidian little marbles, is what they look like, and there's also this little droplet of fluid, and what he does is he picks up the marbles and holds them in his hand, and he uses the droplet of fluid to put a few drops on each one, and kind of gets it over the whole thing, and then he drops one into each of his eye, and he stretches open the eye sockets and fits them in there, and then puts another droplet on each one, and eye sockets kind of shift them and move them, and it looks almost like Toby has figured out how to flex his eye muscles in certain ways so that he can get effects that you normally couldn't get with an eye, because the marbles aren't hooked up to the optic nerve in the way that our eyes are, because he's had surgically changed, so he can kind of flex the interior eye muscles and send the little balls flying around in circles, and he kind of does that for a bit. He puts the case away and says, all right, and he puts his hands on the controls, sort of seems to tap himself into the helicopter, but then he doesn't need the controls because they just start to do their own thing. Max feels the pod lift up. Max says, there's no window or anything, I can't see outside, and Toby says, that's okay, that's what the eyes are for. I can see what the helicopter sees. Max is like, okay, and he feels them coming up and flying. He has no idea how high up they are, and then Toby says, okay, I'm not going to be able to join you in the tower. If you really are trying to to get your sister and try to get people out of there, then what you're going to want to do is I can open up the capacity of this helicopter, but it's going to take some time, and also it'll be dangerous for me to try to land this in the tower because I'm seeing it and the hangar has been damaged. So the easiest way for you to try to get in without having too much trouble with the Reds is if I'm able to drop you off on the side of the tower, and then you can crawl in through the children's vents. It's the place where we have trouble navigating the terrain that they've built because they're used to much higher steps in their staircases and such, so there's been accommodations built both for their own children but also for us to be able to get around. So I'm going to drop you off to a vent on the side of the tower that you can use to get inside. And Max says, how are you going to drop me off? And he says, I'm going to get really close and you're going to jump. And Max says, I don't think that's what I'm going to do. And Toby says, well, that's what you're going to have to do. And Toby points over to the side and he says, you're going to need to run your hand along that wall. And Max goes over and he does it. And the moment it begins to open, just air just rushes in, and it's screaming loud, and Max is terrified. He realizes that he's very close to this tower, to this giant edifice that is made. It looks very much like something constructed by a computer program. It's got very geometric shape as it kind of builds itself up into the sky, almost like a Lego, and it's very gray, and he's so close to it, and he realizes that they're very high up, and he's looking down, and he feels the helicopter turning, get them closer towards the tower, and he sees that he can only consider as a balcony, which is this very geometric flat platform that the 5 feet wide in every direction. It's just this little thing that's jutting out, and you've got little 5 feet wide balconies like this placed all over. And Max is like, you want me to jump to that? And Toby says, yep, I'm going to get you really close. And Max is like, I am not doing this. You've got to be able to land or something. And Toby says, I said that it was a bad idea. You're going to have to jump. Max is looking down at it. He's thinking to himself, all right. The chopper wings are beating and the wind is roaring, and as they come in close, Toby shouts, now, and Max leaps from the side of the pod. Terrifying. His stomach rises up into his neck. He's going to throw up as he's falling, collapses onto this platform and is able to roll across his side, but then he's just left lying there with all of the exhilaration of what's just happened just still pumping like hot liquid, and he's just kind of left there and feeling like he's going to throw up or something, and then he's able to turn himself over and face the ground and heaving really hard, and then he kind of shakily gets up and sees the entrance, which is this open, almost like this cavern thing, but it's obviously more like a square, and he moves his way over to enter that. He walks down this hallway, and it kind of narrows. The hallway narrows into just this fairly tight kind of corridor, and as he's walking along, and it's pitch black except for some glowy lights and also the light from outside behind him, which makes it actually a bit harder to see, but then as the passageway turns, that light dims, and then the way is lit by these gray glowing lights in the floor, and he follows that, and as he follows it, he can hear ahead of him a song that's very familiar, and he realizes that it's Beyond the Sea by Bobby Darin, and he thinks that's very odd, as you can hear the old 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, he's not sure, this old jazzy tune, this old swing tune, just echoing through the hallway. And he pulls one of the alien rifles off. He pulls the alien rifle off his back and he holds it, and he looks down at the mask that he's got hooked to his belt as well, and is like, I can't put that on. I'm going to see what he's talking about before I try putting that thing on. And he walks forward as he kind of moves his way down the dark hallway, and he hears the music getting louder. He finds another entrance. It opens up into this huge chamber, and he steps out onto basically a catwalk that runs above this huge drop. And what he feels like instantly is that he's in it's like a giant indoor rock climbing gym, because what he sees is these very straight geometric cliff sides that have been built. They run forward and then curve away, and he can see all. It's almost like this labyrinth of these giant walls that reach upwards like 150 feet and downwards at least 200 feet, and he can't see where exactly they end. He just can see sort of this bright mist down near the bottom, and that's sort of what lights up the whole place, is this bright mist that's down near wherever the bottom of these things are. And the catwalks follow the cliffs and branch off in different areas, and he can see that the way the cliffs are structured is that there's very definitely complex forms of staircases that the tall people could almost certainly, with their long legs, just sort of step their way up the side of these things and just go up like mountain goats and climb their way up. And he sees that there are entrances and exits all along these walls that you can then walk into and then walk out of and climb up higher. And it's very interesting. It's very different from what he's used to. He's entered this area, and so he follows the catwalk and realizes that he's going to have to put on the mask, that he doesn't want to, and so he just keeps on following the catwalk and wondering if he'll run into something that makes sense. And he's on there for a little while, and all he can hear is playing very loudly over from somewhere, he can't tell where. He hears Beyond the Sea playing by Bobby Darin throughout the whole place, and that's all he can hear. He can't hear any sounds of fighting or anything. And finally he turns off from one of the catwalks. He thinks he can hear the song coming specifically from one of the entrances in the cliffside, and he turns off from the catwalk and walks towards it with the alien gun in front of him, and he walks into one of the passages. He walks into this square room with a pillar in the center, and the pillar has alien writing carved into it that goes all the way around, and the walls are plain that have sort of symbols on them. Kind of just walks around to explore, and he walks around to the other side of the pole to look at it, and then as he passes by the pole, the doorway that he came through is gone. And it's the weirdest thing, is that as he's standing with the pole between himself and the doorway where he came through, when he's on one side of the pole, the doorway is visible, but when he looks on the other side of the pole, it's gone, and it's been replaced by a wall. And then he realizes that the symbols on the wall to his right are different, but then when he goes back to where he came and stands there, he sees that the symbols are different. And he's just he's very confused by this, and he walks around the pole, and he looks at the wall, and then he looks around, and he sees that there's another doorway there that disappears, and it's almost like it's spiraling in the same space. He can hear, no matter where he goes in this weird spiraling room, Bobby Darin playing in the same volume. Realizes that he's gonna have to put on the mask. There's no way. And so he puts it on, and he starts to let the information kind of come through, and then very quickly, as though the mask kind of knew what he needed to know, he begins to look at the room and realizes that it's not confusing at all. It's because the room is, it's not a square room. It only looks like it's a square room because it's all squished into just this space of a square. But what it really is a multi-sided, more circular figure that's just been bent in space-time oddly so that it can fit into this square room. But really what he's doing is he's walking around in a many-sided, like a decagon or something like that, where every 4 triangles that make it up equal what appears to be a single square room, but then when you walk far enough you enter into the next set of 4 squares, and then into the next set of 4 squares, and in this one he's able to tell, just by looking at it, how far in it would seem to spiral. And he's not sure quite how he's able to do it, but he's able to sense that, and he can sort of, it's almost like he's able to see the room as a spiral and see it as a decagon as he's looking through the mask. And so he starts being able to follow that, and he's able to keep track of where the doors and the entrances are, and able to see why Bobby Darin sounds the same throughout the whole system. And as he begins to travel, he begins to feel that this is more familiar, and realizes that, yeah, this was a good idea coming in here, because this will be a direct shortcut to help me to get to the central core, where they would have almost certainly gone to in an emergency like this. And so they're probably stuck there, and have got the Reds between them and it, and so I can come through guns a-blazing and help them out. I can help my sister, and then I can settle down with the tall people, and we can start building things anew, and marry one of them, and we can have kids. And then suddenly he realizes what he's thinking, and he pulls off the mask, and he starts breathing heavy, and he's like, what the heck? What? And but then he puts it back on again, because when he pulls it off, everything kind of becomes more confusing, and he can't tell what's going on. And so he puts it back on, because he needs it to be able to find his sister, and to do something, and to get her away from these people. But he's afraid he's going to lose himself. As he wears it, he's able to find his way through this maze, and he's able to understand what the geometry is, and how these things are curled up inside of each other, and he's able to follow these passages. And he realizes that the passages are of a religious nature, that these particular ones pertain to religious ideas of this race. The meditation rooms generally should connect quickly to another children's catwalk, and he'll be able to take that straight to the core. And he kind of longs for the times when he used to be able to meditate in these chambers, and wishes that he were back home in the cold mountains, where think about Mom, think about Dad, think about them. Don't think about this alien stuff. It's not real. You didn't come from some planet with mountains. This isn't your home. This is an alien place. This doesn't make any sense. You're just doing this so you can get your sister. And he thinks to himself, think of Mom, think of Dad, think of Mom, think of your wife, and your kids, and the way they've got those almond-shaped eyes. And he gets down on his knees, and he pulls the mask off again, and he's heaving, and he's thinking to himself that maybe I can just crush the mask, and I can figure this out on my own, and I can get through here. Then I can try to keep track of how many times I've gone around the pillars, and I can remember where I'm going. I can figure it out. I can get out of here. I don't need this thing anymore. And then he hears breathing, and he can still hear Bobby Darin playing, but he can distinctly hear footsteps and breathing, and it's heaving. It's a heaving breath, and he knows that breath because it's the same breath that he heard before he blew off the face of a Red. And he hears multiple of them, and he can't tell where they're coming from. He gets up and he looks around, and he can't tell where they're coming from, because all he can see is a pillar, and he's in a square room, but it's coming from everywhere at once. And he puts on the mask, and he immediately is able to sense. He gets down, and he begins trying to move his way around to avoid them. And he realizes, okay, I can take this one passage, and then I'll be able to circumvent them. Hopefully there aren't any more, because I don't want to have to get into a firefight in here, because this is sacred ground. And he shakes his head and he says, it's not sacred ground, it's not sacred to you. And thinks to himself, think about Mom, think about Dad. And he thinks, think about Mom, think of her almond eyes. And he has to stop, and he's like, I can't go on. And then he realizes that the breathing is getting closer, and he can't go forward unless he's wearing this mask. And he keeps on trying to crawl forward, and he can hear the footsteps. They scratch on the floor, and he can hear the heavy breathing, and he can hear mutters from them that say, pain, 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 under fingernails, under eyelids, eardrums, bones, bones, bones. You can hear this coming from several directions, and he's not sure why they've come through here, and the only way he can figure is because they know their way through, because they still remember how things work. He's thinking to himself that it must be because they're biding their time, because they must have found the central core, but they've got, they have to wait a certain amount of time before they can overload the door locks to it, so that they can get to the tall people. And he's like, how the heck do I know that? And he knows how he knows it, because he's becoming one of them. And he crawls through, and he can't help but think to himself that if he does get to his sister, if he has to get there by wearing this mask, is it really going to be worth it, or is he just going to join with them? And he can hear the footsteps, and the breathing, and the mutters about pain and blood, and curdling, and nonsense. What are they talking about? They're saying, help, we're sick, we're very sick, marrow, skin, fat. And he ducks behind a pillar. What is this nonsense? But he can't help but thinking, and then we can live safely, the tall people and us, and I can help take care of the kids, and be able to start up a new life, and then we'll be able to fight off the Toyoshari. And he knows to himself that they're coming. The Toyoshari is coming. The Starfaces are coming. It's only a matter of time before they find Earth too, and so they don't have much time to raise themselves an army to fight them off. He's blurring the line. He can't really remember why he's there, because he keeps on fighting against the thought that, well, he's there so that he can go save the tall people, because he's going to marry one of them, and they're going to have kids, and they're going to fight off the Toyoshari, and that's what they're going to do. And then his sister's going to get older, and she's going to marry one of the tall people's kids who's still getting older, who they've got on the ships, because they don't keep them here on these ships, they keep them on the big ships that they have still out orbiting some of the other planets. They have the kids, their own kids in cryo, but they don't have a whole lot of them because of infertility problems, which were caused by the Toyoshari. And he takes off the mask again, and he's heaving his breath, and he realizes he's breathing as loud as the Reds, and he knows he can hear them coming towards him. And he looks at the mask, he looks at the inside fabric, and he listens to the footsteps, and he listens to the voices that say, meat. I hear meat. I hear you. Where are you? Where are you? Little friend. Help. 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 I have the shiniest skull. And he's running, he is flying, and he's put the mask on, and he's blowing away, and they've got their own guns and they're firing, and he's running for his life down these different hallways, and he runs, and he's blasting away, and he's blasting away the pillars and putting dents in the walls, and they're firing back, and then he realizes that he knows how to use these things, he knows how to use these guns, and he knows how to turn it up to higher power, and he realizes that there's a safety on this one that'll keep it from going up to a higher power, and he knows where he can grab it, that he can break that thing. and he's able to break off the safety. He's able to charge it for a hire, aims at a group of them who are coming up, and then they realize what he's doing, and they try to turn around, and they're screaming. Blasts them away and leaves nothing but scorch. And he's running, and he's blasting at them, and as he comes, the noise as it echoes throughout while Bobby Darin is still playing over and over again the same song, Beyond the Sea, and he has no idea what that's for or why it's playing. But he's running to where he knows that the catwalk is, and he comes out onto it, and he sees that there's a ton of Reds who are waiting on the platforms of the cliffs around this one particular circular structure where there are blocked doors and things, and they have these strange devices they've strapped onto the doors that seem to be sending electrical charges into them. He doesn't know what's up with that, but he begins blasting away at them and putting a real dent in their forces as he's running along this catwalk, and they start firing at him, and the blasts blow apart a piece of the catwalk, and it starts swinging to the side, and he's able to grip his fingers into it and cling on as they fire, and he's able to clamber himself back up onto the walk. But then they blow another piece from it, and the whole thing comes swinging down, and he swings along with it and then lets go at just the right time, and it flings him over onto one of the cliff sides, onto one of the platforms, and he lands there, and he's able to leap his way down as they're shooting, and they're kind of running over towards him. These great big beasts, great big mutant things. He's able to jump his way over, and then he jumps over to this one small little vent thing that he's able to clamber his way into, and the Reds come after him, and he hears their arms reaching as far as they can into the vent, but they're rather bigger than him, and he's skinny enough, and they've got too many boils, and they keep on trying to get in one at a time, and he's able to crawl through this vent, and a few times he almost gets stuck as he's trying to pull himself through, and he has to leave his gun behind, his big old rifle, because he can't fit. But he's able to squeeze himself through. He realizes that this is something built for younger kids, but he's still barely able to make it. Ends up entering this large chamber that was apparently within the central core area, and he sees hundreds of tall people and thousands of children inside this little area, and all the children, most of the children are wearing masks or have masks with them, and all of the tall people, many of them don't have so many robes and things that he's used to seeing them with on the planet. Many of them are in what looks like looser clothing, and he can see their long legs, and he can see their weird toe feet as they're on the ground, and they're playing with the kids, or they're doing things with them. But there's also a great number of somewhat shorter tall people who look like the males, while the much rather taller ones are the females. And the males have these guns, and they're on the edges, and he sees the electrical shocks, and he sees them discussing with each other because they could hear the explosions from outside, and many of them seem to be saying between each other that there's been a dent made in the forces. And he sees as a few doors open, and a number of the troops run out and start blasting at the Reds and taking some guerrilla tactics and taking advantage, and all of this as he kind of crawls through the vent and then just sort of falls out and collapses onto the floor, and everybody kind of turns, who's in that little area, and turns over towards him as he falls down there with his mask on, and he pulls it off, and he's looking at everybody, and the first thing he thinks to himself is, "I'm home." It starts to fade, and then immediately he thinks, "I'm not home," as everyone stares at him. And then by some kind of coincidence he can hear, "Is that him? Is that him?" And he sees his sister run forward. She's not wearing her mask. She's got it to her side. And she comes out from the others, and she's like, "Where did you come from? You came all the way up here still?" And he says, Yeah, I wanted to make sure you were okay. I just wanted to make sure you were fine." And she says, "Of course I'm fine. Of course I'm fine." And he's looking around at the tall people, and he can see who we think was the one lady who we first met. still standing there, and her weird mouth is what he can only think is a smile. And he smiles back, and he steps forward. He grabs his sister around the neck and has her in a headlock and holds her in front of him, and then pulls the gun out and points it towards everybody else and says, "Okay, we're leaving. It's been nice. It's been really nice. You're welcome for fighting off the Reds. That's my thank you for not hurting my sister. But, you did sort of brainwash her and try to make her into some sort of a breeder, so I'm a little ticked off. But I'm going to take her with me now. So bye." And is sort of dragging her with him as he's trying to make his way back up towards the vent, and she's screaming, squirming, and the tall people step forward, and then the lady takes several bounds and is moving towards him, and he's got it pointed, and he says, "You want me to put another one in your chest? I saved your life." He can't tell what the expression is on her face, really, and he's not really paying attention, as he's able to climb up over towards the vent, and he pulls himself in first, and he's able to drag his sister in, and she's fussing, and he's trying to drag her through whatever this little tunnel and squirm his way back. And she's saying, "Do you have any kind of plan? What, are you going to drag me through the fight with the Reds? You could have at least waited until they were done." And he's like, "Are you critiquing me on how to rescue you?" And she's like, "Yeah, because I don't want you to die." And he's like, "You have gotten so persnickety ever since you got abducted by aliens." And he's moving through these vents backwards, and then as he's moving, his leg hits up against something, and he's like, "Well, there weren't any curves in this. I mean, there were curves, but there weren't any sharp turns." He's like, "Well, how is that sealed up?" And he realizes it hasn't sealed up, but it's gotten far narrower. And he's not sure what the deal is there, and he's trying to move his way back through, and then he realizes that some sort of a milky gas is starting to come in through the vent, and as he smells it, it makes him extremely nauseous, and he just, despite himself, lets go of his sister, who immediately clambers forward away from his grasp, and gas starts filling up the whole place, but it doesn't seem to affect her. It only seems to affect him, and he doesn't know what's going on. And then for some reason he notices that he hadn't noticed it before, but he looks up at her, and he looks at her eyes, and he realizes that they're not very real, and he doesn't notice this until he sees her swivel them around completely in her socket, and then bring them back into place, and realizes that those are just marbles, but they're just painted to look like eyes. "What? You too?" She is seeing everything Toby's seeing, and Toby can tap into machinery for the Greys. And Toby sees that he's trying to take her, and they planned this. Toby planned this with the others. They left him behind so that he could watch out, so if I didn't fall for the mask when I went up, I could be stopped. He wakes up, and he's lying on grass, and he's staring up at a tower, and there's still smoke coming out of it. Then the second thing he sees is a tall person standing over him. It's a male, and looks very intimidating, has a gun pointed at him. And then he notices his sister standing on the other side with her mask on, and she says to him, "Well, we have a very confusing decision to make, because you did save our lives, for one, right after you shot my mother. Then you came guns a-blazing into a tower, blew up a good number of the Reds who were trying to attack us, allowing for us to guerrilla fight our way out of there. But then you attempt to shoot my mother again and try to kidnap me. So we're not really sure what to do with you." He says, "Well, you could just commit me to an insane asylum or something. That might work." She says, "Well, the official decision is to leave it to you. agree to wear the mask and to view the Enkai and to become intermingled with the archetypes of our people. Or you can choose exile. I figured either way you'd be happy, assuming you chose it. He says, exile where? She looks around and says, well, there's plenty of space for it. He says, yeah, I suppose there is. He chooses exile at first. And he wanders. And he cries and stuff, but he tries to console himself that it's not really his sister, but he knows it really is his sister. She's just changed. And they took the mask back. They gave it back to Toby. And then what he's looking for is his real parents. And he can't find any trace of them. He's not sure where they went or what happened to them. And he ends up finding at an old place where the disease had apparently taken a number of people on a farm a little bit west of where he'd lived. There had been a group of people living there, and then the disease came and swept through, and apparently there were enough people left to bury them, and he finds a record of the people who had died before people had moved on, and his parents are dead. They're on the record left. They're buried somewhere in the field. A few tall people were doing damage control. There were some dead reds, and they were going through, burning them up, leaving just scorch marks on the pavement. And they all had special headphones that they were listening to Beyond the Sea by Bobby Darin on, because the Greys love that song. They were ambushed, and a number of Reds came out of nowhere and started attacking, and the tall people were having some trouble fending them off, and then a number of very powerful missile shots came and blew the Reds aside and just obliterated them, and they turned to look to where they came from, and they see this man walking towards them, a human who's wearing this mask that they're not sure where he got it from. And he approaches when things have calmed down, and he says, I want to meet my mother now.
Somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing.